All right, here we are in Lecture 8, Realism and Formalism. This might be a little bit of a confusing section. I know it's some people, for some reason, have a hard time kind of putting two and two together, but just remember, it is what it sounds like. Um, Filmmaking in a realistic approach or one that uses the forms or the matter of filmmaking um, to create a story. So just always remember real and form if you're ever confused. So let's start with realism. It's a filmmaking theory or practice that sets to replicate our life and our experiences, humans, and it minimizes subjectivity by the elimination as much as possible of the artist's involvement. And this really has its basis and kind of starting point in photography, something that is unfabricated. It's just light hitting the film, um, makes it real. Realism is a little bit hard to pin down exactly, what I mean by that, because all films sort of strive for a sense of reality. So even if it's Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, or Marvel films, they should somewhat create a sense of the real. That is, the rules of the world and the envelopment that you become in while immersed in that world. So there is a realness, quote unquote, to any film. So these are some of Lumiere first films, um, pioneers of kind of the film industry. These are back in 1895. So this is real. It was just basically documenting things going on. You could watch these at your leisure. But they really, I mean, it would be what it sounds like train entering the station, people leaving a factory, stuff like that. So it was really, it was exactly what it sounded like, and it showed exactly what it sounded like. It was just one shot, staged, kind of just like a series of photographs laid out in that 24 frames a second to where you have a film. So some of the elements of realism, um, deep focus, that is seeing things close and far back in focus, normal lens at eye level, using long takes, natural light, um, a lack of non-diegetic sound, so no score accompanying it, simple production design, simple acting techniques. So what does realism mean to the viewer? What is your participation on it? Well, go ahead and you'll click on this link or copy and paste it, one or the other, and it'll send you to a Vimeo of a science experiment where they put glasses on people with kind of this invisible little laser or something that while the audience was watching the film, it was showing where their eyes are attracted to at any moment. And it's a long shot with no cuts. So it's pretty interesting how we search around for that information. So films that set out to replicate life in the day to day, fictional realism, things that like Gus Van Sant's Elephant. If you'll watch this clip here, long take, deep focus, natural lighting, very simple simple acting style. In fact, I think a lot of them were non-professional actors used for this film. Um, so very realistic approach to filmmaking, very linear stories, point A to point B. That's not flashbacks and things like that. Um, there's motivated causation, meaning this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and this happens. So this effect um, has a reaction, then an effect, and a reaction, so on and so forth. And the characters are believable. Historical realism, There Will Be Blood, one of my favorite films. And when you go to watch that on Vimeo, you'll see the same thing. So historical realism is setting out to replicate the past as accurately as possible. So things like costumes, speech patterns, dialogue, and the production design. Documentary realism. They are, in a sense, a realism in that the director is setting out to get the reality of whatever the subject matter is or the world that's being filmed. Again, it could be subjective or objective in terms of, is the director making it with an agenda in mind, or going there as sort of a fly on the wall. So they can be very passive or active in the creation of the narrative at the end. Watch this scene. It's really funny from This is Spinal Tap if you've never seen it. It's a kind of where the mockumentary started. So worth a watch. I want to talk about this. Some of what information you're getting here is from Andre Bazin. What is cinema? Bazin. It's French. I always forget which is the correct way. Bazin, Bazin. I've heard it all. So who is he? He helped to elevate film to where we're at now, a subject we're studying. Kind of before, it wasn't really seen as art. It was sort of seen as, I don't know, what we would consider TikTok right now. It's not really necessarily an art. Some might argue it is. I don't know. But Bazin really helped elevate it. In fact, he worked on the Cahiers du Cinema, which was kind of one of the first, this French publication at really looking at films academically, and very much influenced the realist movement and a lot of realist filmmakers. So he talked about photography as the truest form for capturing man's innate need for transcendence. So unlike painting, he kind of juxtaposes it to painting a lot. Painting's always going to have more of the artist involvement. Photography, you can't really manipulate. If you're just out taking a picture, you're just, now depending on what, the depth of field, things like that, but you're capturing reality as it actually is. You're not really distorting it. And this maintains a level of objectivity. So for him, leaving things up for the audience to decide truth, just kind of like when you watch that clip I was telling you about where the eye is going, that's you creating the truth of the film, finding meaning versus the meaning being handed to you. Kind of interesting. He argued that one day there'd be an evolution in cinema that would lead to total immersive filmmaking, where the audience would be a part of it. The myth of the total cinema, kind of like the holodeck from Star Trek, if any of you are Trekkies out there. Fun fact, watch the first Star Trek, you'll see me in it. Might have said that already. I don't know. I don't record these lectures one right after the other. I might have mentioned that. But look for a Starfleet cadet and you'll find me. Just no beard. So Bazin also admits that there will be some element of the artist's involvement into a work. So things, shot choice, lighting, angle. But he talks about trying to avoid the manipulation of image. And that's kind of what he was after. So for instance, a close-up shot with a shallow, focused, forced attention on a specific area. He says these things are going to, be in there. It's not completely, just hitting record and letting the film play out in all ways. So certain rules were also put in place, like a shot reverse shot. In a conversation, for instance, we see one character speak, that we cut to another character to maintain that 180-degree rule, and in a way that helps create the realism of this being an actual world that we're seeing. Again, other rules that were kind of put into place, that depth of field that we talked about, brings the audience in closer to the reality. And this kind of what we're going for, and he goes for in a lot of his arguments, is this implies more active mental participation. So instead of your eyes going around and finding it, there's the formalist will say, look at this. Deep focus, deep depth of field allows for ambiguity. So 2 examples from Citizen Kane. When you were watching it, very much good examples of what he's talking about. So this is, realism at its finest. He loved this film. Watching the film sort of as if we're almost there. So watch these examples. This may come back into your final exam. So I would definitely kind of remember and watch these, how depth of field helped Citizen Kane. So Citizen Kane does break away from sort of a objective standpoint. It does things like that. The montage at the dinner scene, superimpositions, like the part where the bird screams. Um, but Bazan says that the contemporary director doesn't exclude the use of montage, kind of a fancy way of saying the editing style. How could he without reverting to a primitive babbling? He makes an integral part of his plastic. So the plastic for him was something that has created the artwork. So yes, there are examples of when filmmakers will, employ realism, but they don't exclude using the forms as well. Those other things like editing and things like that to manipulate the audience in a way to say, hey, look at this. Instead of you always just sitting there watching and making sense of it yourself, look at this. So here's a good kind of chart now that we'll move on to formalism. So in realism, there's an idea of I'm honest. We're just replicating life, right? And then formalist, I'm artistic. I do crazy shots while editing, high and low angles. I vary the distance. I show what you want to see, and then surprise with something new. So, kind of good examples of where the comparisons and contrasts are. So this would be an idea of formalism. So it's not really replicating reality that looks nothing like reality. It doesn't take away from what it is. That doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or anything, but it's communicating meaning in a different way. It's using the forms of light and pattern and shade and texture and everything to communicate the meaning of what's going on. So this would be kind of in comparison to, say, a still photograph of someone, where you can see the difference. One is real, one is using forms to create meaning. So realism, we're more fly on the wall, observing and finding our own thoughts and our own meaning with the story. Formalism, the answers are sometimes made up for us through the filmmaking, through the manipulation of reality to prove a point, to gain your attention, something like that. And again, just remember, it concerns the forms, the framing, the editing, the lighting, the production design, the acting choice, colors, etc. It concentrates on the manipulation of these things as opposed to presenting life as it is. The information we receive is based on the form, not its relationship with reality. A belief that how we view films is different from how we view reality. So you say, okay, I've watched some films, I've seen a few, I know that there's differences in them, but there's never one that's, well, there's extremes, just like life, there's polar opposites, but there's also the middle ground. So what Hollywood did was it took bits and pieces of both and kind of meshed them together. So we have films that replicate or show a realist approach to filmmaking. But it also took things that said, hey, this style of editing or this framing, this composition, this lighting, whatever, bring it all together. And that's kind of where the classic Hollywood style is. And that's what we're all sort of familiar with. So they're not necessarily opposed. A little bit of a recipe, a little bit of realism, a little bit of formalism, and then you form meaning. So again, looking for that framing, that lighting, but also patterns and motifs in constructing reality. Formalists are more concerned with creating meaning and ideas through forms and not wanting to simply just set that camera down and go. They're wanting to see the images come together in a certain way that says this and this equals this. And that's kind of a little bit of what we're going to talk about here in just a second. But this question here at the bottom is a good way of asking yourself, is a flower observed differently in life than on a film? Kind of a loaded question. But the point is that realism and formalism, they're looking to find truth in a lot of ways. Some aren't, some are just banal, whatever, shots flickering on a wall. They don't really mean anything. But psychologically, socially, religiously, politically, um, or life as it is. There's an extent of trying to make sense out of our reality, and using filmmaking to help make sense is just one tool uh, that we use to make meaning of life. Just really briefly, formalism, you can see it in different genres. I think one great example is German Expressionism. We've talked a little bit about it before and how it's influenced things like horror films today. And this is where everything is really manipulated. It's not striving for realism in any way. It's striving for the forms and things, even like the sets, the wardrobe, the makeup, the lighting, the acting style, are all embellished in such a way as to create these extremes in formalism. So go ahead and take. This is a actually really cool movie. They talked about it in uh, what were we watching? The History of the Green Screen, and faking it. And this was that black mat, that traveling map. This is from that movie. This is the whole movie. You don't need to watch it. Start at about the 11 minute, and then just watch a few minutes, and you can start to see how the environment, the movement, the costume, the camera all create meaning. So one example is the actors kind of lumbering through the woods. They gave him weighted shoes so he wouldn't walk normally. So even his walk started to mean something. So it was fabricated in such a way as to create meaning. That lumbering movement kind of showed his depression, his angst, his anxiety, kind of leading up to a moment. But even just the buildings and everything like that, you start to see kind of these extremes that are certainly far from what we experience in reality. Kind of going off on a tangent, I think this is kind of how that mesh started to come between realism and formalism. Hollywood would often get the best directors from other countries into America, especially at the very early stages of filmmaking in America. If you take a history of film class, you'll start to see a lot of the early directors and writers. In fact, a lot of people involved in film from different things were immigrants from other countries. And a lot of times they were people who were at the height of perfection in their native land. And Hollywood had more money. So a lot of times filmmakers would kind of get seduced to come over here and make films. And they'd bring with them their formalist approach to filmmaking, whereas we were still kind of at that silent stage, of filmmaking. So they would blend the two together. Again, another formalist approach, one of the classic films of all time, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. It's just kind of fun, bizarre film, but a more modern formalist film, you could say, and director, Tim Burton and Edward Scissorhands, where everything means something. Down, the costume, everything's kind of exaggerated, everything's kind of big and bold and huge lines and curves in some parts, and then very rigid and pattern like scenery, sets, costumes, decor, things like that. All the production design and lighting, everything's sort of manipulative as you're watching it. Doesn't take it away from you, doesn't change it, but certainly exaggerated. Okay, so speaking of places outside of America, the Soviet Montage is very interesting. It's a kind of the birthplace of editing in such a way that changed how films were done. So this is kind of after the Bolshevik Revolution. They kind of knew that, hey, films are a good way to propagate propaganda and um, uh, the control of information. Let's put it that way. So there were kind of schools founded where they would take films and re-edit them and put them back together to try and form meaning through different styles of filmmaking. So, for instance, the Kuleshov effect. Just let this play through. It's pretty short. So we have this shot of Alfred Hitchcock. We cut to what he's looking at. just pausing it right there, just so you know as you're watching this, um, it's the same shot used in the last one of Hitchcock. It's the exact same thing, same shots. So I'll pause it one more. So what we got from that first one, we see him. He's looking at, we assume a mother with a child, and goes back to him, and he's smiling, and we make a meaning out of it. He's, you know, enjoying seeing the family and the bond, something something to that effect. So here's the second one, same footage. Okay, again, so same footage used of him, just that middle shot was changed, and we get a whole different meaning of that kind of leer he has. Watch it again without me blathering through it, and see, okay, this is the same shot, but I have a completely different takeaway as an audience member because of this manipulation of editing. I go from, oh, he's, an old man seeing mother with his son smiling, and isn't that so cute, to an old man kind of leering at a woman in a bikini. Changes the feel of everything. So we have this other guy, Sergei Eisenstein. He's kind of the the one, a lot of people when they're talking about this idea of the Soviet montage. Again, montage is just fancy word for editing, the assembly of the parts together. Um, he believed in the power of the cut, and there was a dialectic approach that he had towards filmmaking. So he had a thesis plus an antithesis equals a synthesis. So if you look at it from this perspective, this image plus this image gives you a meaning. So those images put together, and then this image plus this image gives you meaning. So kind of like what we just saw with Hitchcock, is that you find meaning in the way the shots are put together. So go ahead and watch this section on Eisenstein and the Soviet montage. It will help to explain things more, and give good examples of what's going on, that we're all not there to watch these together to answer questions. It's a little bit of a puzzling thing because we don't watch films a lot the way Eisenstein made them. It's kind of a theory that's, I wouldn't say gone away, but certainly he even kind of faded away from filmmaking. But go ahead, take notes on this. There might be some things coming up down the road in terms of your final. You don't need to know it perfectly, but if, let's say, Eisenstein has like 5 different types of montage, I would know just the names of them. You don't need to go too in depth because it's pretty heavy. This is another good example of formalism in film. Hitchcock incorporated a lot of this into his films. It's from Psycho. If you haven't seen it, watch it. I will warn you, it's kind of violent, so you're not obligated to, because I'll give you an idea. We're made to feel we are present in the shower, and we feel like we're being stabbed. We also feel like we're dead, and it's all through the way it's cut together. Very impactful scene that kind of, when you're thinking of Psycho, that's what a lot of people think of. A lot of things going on there. I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen it, but very very important scene in the film, and a very good example of how formalism works. Here again in the movie Vertigo, there's an incorporation of, kind of come over here to the towards the end here. Jimmy Stewart's character has vertigo, and he keeps, which is, kind of a something happened to him up high, so it's not just a fear of a height, it's sort of this disorientation with that kind of comes along with it. Where'd you go? Bear with me. All right, so that effect, that dolly out and zoom in, that creates a sense of that feeling of vertigo. So it's not real. It's not something we necessarily experience, but a fabrication and use of the camera to create that feeling. Rewatch this one again without me talking so you can see. You might have missed it. And then Hitchcock also worked in realism. This film Rope, I'll let you watch parts of it on your own. You'll see there's no even real cuts. It where there are, it's hidden. You don't see them. So he kind of worked in both avenues of filmmaking. Well, here's just. Now I'll let you watch it. I want you to watch it without me kind of going on and on. Okay, finally, here's an example that I found of realism versus formalism. So they shoot a scene once realistically, and then they shoot it again using those forms to make you feel a certain way towards the character, what's going on, and everything like that. You'll kind of get the gist of it as you're watching it. So big takeaways: watch that Soviet montage from Filmmaker IQ. Watch the clips that are presented. This is a little bit heavier. It'd be a lot more fun if we were together for this one, but hopefully you take something away from it because there are some cool elements to it. All right, that's the end of this lecture, and I will see you at lecture 9.